Hey everyone! Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. And of course, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. Now, imagine this, a regular evening, a familiar event, nothing out of the ordinary, until a whispered confession changes everything. What happened next? You won't believe it. Stay tuned, because this story will make you question everything you thought you knew. The air buzzed with animated chatter, punctuated by the clinking of glasses and the smooth notes of a jazz tune drifting from the speakers. The annual office holiday party was in full swing, and for the first time in a long while, I found myself allowing the tension in my shoulders to ease. I wasn't one to linger in office gossip circles or spend much time loitering in the break room. At 49, with years of experience in corporate finance, I had learned the value of maintaining a professional distance from workplace drama. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was the soft golden glow of fairy lights reflecting off the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in an almost dreamlike haze. Or perhaps it was the champagne, bubbling warmly in my veins, melting away the usual restraint I held so tightly to. I subtly adjusted the sleeves of my emerald green dress, a rare departure from the sharp business suits that had become my second skin. My gaze swept across the room, taking in the clusters of colleagues deep in conversation, bursts of laughter erupting over shared jokes and holiday plans. It was the usual end-of-year revelry, comfortable, predictable. And yet, my eyes caught on something, or rather, someone. Ethan Reynolds. My boss. Tall, poised, and exuding that effortless charisma that made people stop and listen the moment he spoke. At 56, he carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that didn't demand attention but commanded it nonetheless. He wasn't just the CEO of the company, he was the kind of person who made everyone feel valued, even in passing. Over the years, our interactions had remained strictly professional. Respectful, yet distant. I had worked under him for nearly a decade, but beyond project discussions and formal meetings, we never exchanged anything more than polite acknowledgments. Which is why I was caught completely off guard when I met his gaze from across the room and watched as he started making his way toward me. Enjoying yourself? His voice was smooth, casual, yet carrying that signature warmth that always put people at ease. I lifted my glass slightly, offering a small smile. Trying to. You don't exactly strike me as the office party type either. A low chuckle escaped him as he took a sip of his drink. You're right. Normally, I make an appearance and disappear before anyone notices. He hesitated for a brief second before adding, but this year feels different. I tilted my head slightly, curiosity piqued. Different how? For the first time that night, his expression shifted, just a flicker, but enough for me to notice. He leaned in, his voice lowering just enough to make it feel like a secret. There's something I've been meaning to tell you. His words sent a small jolt through me. I blinked, caught off guard. Oh. A slow exhale left his lips, his mouth curving into a quiet, unreadable smile. Not here. A strange, unspoken energy passed between us, something I couldn't quite name. And before I could press for more, someone called his name from across the room. Just like that, the moment dissolved. But as he turned away, offering me one last lingering glance before excusing himself, I realized something. I wasn't just curious about what he had to say. I was anticipating it. I hadn't expected the sudden jolt in my chest, not fear, but something else entirely. Anticipation. Excitement. A thrill I wasn't ready to acknowledge just yet. Before I could find the right words, someone called his name from across the room, snapping the moment in half like a brittle thread. His eyes lingered on mine for just a second longer, as if debating whether to say more, but then he stepped away, slipping back into the crowd with an effortless grace. I stood there, rooted in place, his words looping in my mind. Not here. What had he been about to say? The night carried on, but I was only half present. Laughter and conversation swirled around me, yet my thoughts remained fixated on Daniel. Every time our gazes met across the room, it felt as though an invisible thread pulled tight between us, an understanding neither of us dared to voice. By the time I reached for my coat, ready to slip out for the night, a gentle touch on my elbow stopped me. My breath hitched as I turned, finding Daniel standing close behind me, his expression unreadable. "Do you have a moment?" he asked, his voice quieter now, more deliberate. I hesitated. Not because I wanted to say no, but because I already knew that whatever this was, it wasn't just casual conversation anymore. Finally, I nodded. Of course. Without another word, he gestured toward the balcony and led the way. The December air wrapped around us as we stepped outside, crisp and cold, but I barely noticed. My pulse thrummed in my ears, drowning out the muffled sounds of the party behind us. "I didn't mean to be cryptic earlier," he admitted, running a hand through his graying hair. "I just wanted to find the right moment." I folded my arms, the chill biting at my skin, though it was nothing compared to the heat simmering beneath my ribs. "All right," I said, my voice steady despite the way my heart pounded. "I'm listening." He exhaled slowly, gathering his thoughts before meeting my gaze, not as my boss, not as the CEO, but as a man with something deeply personal to say. "For years, I've admired you," he confessed. "Not just the work you do, but you. The way you carry yourself. The way you handle everything with such grace." He shook his head slightly. "I never said anything because, well, I didn't think it was my place." The space between us felt smaller now, even as the city lights stretched endlessly beyond the balcony. I could barely focus on them, my attention locked on Daniel, on the quiet intensity in his eyes. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I wasn't sure what to say. "You don't have to say anything," he added gently, sensing my hesitation. "I just needed you to know." And just like that, everything shifted. I stood there, the night air cool against my skin, but all I could feel was the warmth of his words settling into the space between us. Ethan Reynolds, my boss, the man I had spent years respecting from a careful distance, had just admitted that he saw me as more than just an employee, more than a colleague. I swallowed hard, my pulse thrumming. "Daniel," my voice came out softer than I expected, barely more than a whisper. "I don't know what to say." His lips curved into a small smile, but there was something uncertain beneath it, an edge of vulnerability I had never seen in him before. But there was something else beneath his smile, a hint of nervousness, as if he wasn't quite sure how I'd respond. "You don't have to say anything," he reassured me, his voice gentle but firm. "I didn't tell you this to make things difficult for you or put you in an uncomfortable position. I couldn't let another year go by without being honest." That word, honest, echoed through my mind, settling deep in my chest. When was the last time I had truly been honest with myself? For years, I had devoted everything to my career, pouring my energy into being the steadfast professional, the reliable one, the woman who always had it together. I had built my reputation on discipline and composure, never allowing personal emotions to blur the carefully drawn lines of my life. And yet, standing here now, something within me shifted. Something unraveled. Of course, I had noticed Daniel before. How could I not? He wasn't just a powerful man, he was kind, intelligent, and carried himself with an effortless confidence that made people stop and listen. There was a quiet strength in him, an unspoken depth I had never allowed myself to truly acknowledge. I had dismissed any stray thoughts about him as fleeting, insignificant. But had they really been? I let out a slow breath, trying to steady the sudden rush of emotions tightening in my chest. "I don't know if I ever let myself think about this before," I admitted, my voice softer now. His expression shifted, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "I understand." The space between us felt charged, tense but not uncomfortable. It wasn't the kind of tension that made me want to step away. Instead, it pulled at me, filling the air with a quiet weight that neither of us could ignore. I glanced back toward the ballroom through the glass doors. Inside, people were still laughing, drinking, completely unaware of the moment unfolding just outside. I turned my gaze back to Daniel, searching his face. "Why now?" I asked, genuinely curious. He hesitated, exhaling slowly before answering. "Because for years, I convinced myself that timing mattered. That I had to keep my distance. That maintaining a professional boundary was more important than acknowledging what I felt." His eyes held mine, steady and unflinching. "But tonight, I just couldn't ignore it anymore." His words settled into the deepest parts of me, shaking something loose, something I hadn't even realized had been dormant for so long. A cool gust of wind swept across the balcony, sending a shiver through me. Without thinking, Daniel slipped off his coat and draped it around my shoulders. The gesture was simple, instinctive, but the warmth of him, seemed to sink into my skin in a way I hadn't expected. "I don't want to complicate your life," he said, his voice quieter now. "I just needed you to know." I met his gaze, searching for any trace of hesitation, any sign that he regretted saying what he did. But there was none. Just quiet sincerity. Something inside me softened. I didn't have all the answers, and I wasn't sure what any of this meant yet. But what I did know was that I wasn't ready to turn away from it. I let a small smile tug at my lips. I paused, taking a steadying breath. "I'd like to figure out what this means." Something flickered in his eyes. Relief. Or maybe hope. His lips parted slightly, then he nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then let's figure it out." The moment stretched between us, filled with something unspoken, something that neither of us could take back now. And for the first time in years, I didn't want to. This wasn't just about attraction. It wasn't just a fleeting moment of curiosity or chemistry. It was something deeper, something unspoken that had been lingering between us for years, unacknowledged until now. And now that it had surfaced, there was no pushing it back down. Before either of us could say another word, the balcony doors swung open with a sudden burst of noise. "There you two are." Daniel and I turned quickly, instinctively stepping apart as Amanda, one of the senior managers, appeared in the doorway. Her cheeks were flushed, her expression slightly tipsy but amused. "We're about to do the toast," she announced, swaying slightly as she pointed a finger at Daniel. "Can't have the boss missing his own speech." Daniel glanced at me, something unreadable flickering across his face. A hesitation. A silent question. I inhaled sharply, forcing a small, composed smile. "We should go back in," I said, adjusting his coat more securely around my shoulders, as if the warmth of it could steady me. He gave a slow nod. Neither of us said anything else, but as we stepped back inside, I felt it. Everything had changed. "Think you know where this is going?" "Trust me, the most unexpected part is still ahead. Stay until the end, because this story is about to take a turn you won't see coming." The warmth of his coat still clung to me as we re-entered the ballroom, the hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the festive laughter all rushing back around us as if nothing had happened. And yet, we knew, that something had. Daniel moved toward the front of the room, slipping effortlessly back into his role, while I blended into the crowd, the familiar comfort of anonymity wrapping around me like armor. I should have felt relief, slipping back into routine. But I didn't. Because I could still feel it. The weight of his words. The unspoken shift between us. As Daniel lifted his glass, preparing to give the annual toast, I found myself watching him differently. Not as my boss. Not as the CEO. But as a man. A man I had never allowed myself to see in this way before. "To another year of success," he said, his deep voice carrying easily across the room. He paused briefly, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before adding, "and to the incredible people who make it possible." Everyone clapped, their glasses raised, voices blending into a chorus of cheers. And then, for the briefest of moments, his eyes met mine over the rim of his glass. The room might have been filled with people, but in that second, it felt like it was just us. I swallowed hard, breaking the gaze, bringing my champagne to my lips to mask the sudden tightness in my throat. I needed air. Murmuring a quick excuse to no one in particular, I slipped through the crowd, moving swiftly toward the hallway near the coat check. The further I got from the ballroom, the more muffled the music became, the laughter fading into the background. Leaning against the wall, I exhaled slowly, pressing a hand to my chest as if I could steady the rapid beating of my heart. This wasn't supposed to happen. For years, I had been careful, had built a reputation as someone professional, composed, in control. I had spent so long drawing clear boundaries between my personal and professional life, ensuring they never bled into one another. But one whispered confession on a cold December night had shattered that illusion. And now, I wasn't sure if I wanted to piece it back together. Thinking about sneaking out? The deep voice cut through the quiet hallway, making me jump slightly. I turned quickly, my breath catching for just a moment before I found Daniel standing a few feet away, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. A startled laugh escaped me. Maybe. He took a slow step closer, his gaze searching mine. Did I make things complicated for you? I considered the question, letting the weight of the night settle over me. The truth was, I wasn't sure yet. I felt different, unsteady, as if something I had carefully locked away had been nudged open. I don't know yet, I admitted. Daniel nodded, as if he understood completely. I meant what I said, you know, he murmured. I looked down at the polished floor, my fingers tightening slightly around my clutch. I know. A silence stretched between us, not awkward, but heavy with something neither of us knew how to define. When he finally spoke again, his voice was quieter, more measured. I don't expect an answer right now, he said. He exhaled, shaking his head slightly as if frustrated with himself. I don't want to pretend anymore. His honesty sent a deep tremor through me. I lifted my gaze, meeting his, my pulse drumming steadily in my ears. Neither do I. Something flickered in his expression, surprise, maybe, or relief. I swallowed, suddenly overwhelmed. I should go, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure why. He didn't stop me, but just as I turned to leave, his fingers brushed against mine in a quiet, unspoken request. It wasn't a bold move, not some grand romantic gesture, just a simple touch, a fleeting connection. Let me call you tomorrow, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, just for a second, before nodding. Okay. With that, I slipped my hand away, my heart pounding as I walked toward the exit. But as I stepped outside into the crisp night air, I knew, this was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. Lighter. As if something inside me had been shaken loose after years of being buried. I spent the early hours pacing my apartment, replaying everything from the night before. The words spoken on the balcony, the way Daniel had looked at me, the quiet moment in the hallway when he had reached for my hand. And, of course, his final question, let me call you tomorrow. I had said yes. But now, as I stood in my kitchen, staring at my phone resting on the counter, a strange mix of anticipation and uncertainty swirled inside me. Was I really ready for this? A part of me hesitated, not because I didn't want to see where this could go, but because it had been so long since I had allowed myself to feel anything like this. Something raw. Something real. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. Daniel. I inhaled sharply, steadying myself before picking it up. Hello, I said, my voice softer than I intended. On the other end, his voice was warm. Steady. Familiar. I wasn't sure if he would actually call. And from the sound of his voice, he hadn't been sure I'd pick up either. A small smile tugged at my lips as I leaned against the counter. Neither was I. He chuckled softly, the sound low and warm. Fair enough. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. But the silence wasn't awkward or uncertain, it carried something else entirely. A quiet understanding. A mutual acknowledgement that we were standing at the edge of something unfamiliar, something that neither of us quite knew how to navigate. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. "I don't want to pressure you into anything," he said carefully. "But would you have dinner with me tonight? Somewhere quiet. No office. No titles. Just us." I hesitated, but only for a second. "I'd like that," I said. That evening, I found myself in a cozy, intimate restaurant tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. The glow of candlelight flickered against the crisp white tablecloths, casting soft shadows that made everything feel warmer, more inviting. The air hummed with gentle conversation, the quiet clinking of silverware, the occasional burst of laughter from another table. Daniel was already there when I arrived. As I stepped inside, he stood, his eyes meeting mine with something that looked a little like relief. "You came," he said, his voice carrying a quiet sincerity. I smiled as he pulled out my chair. "I did." As the evening unfolded, something unexpected happened. We talked. Not about work. Not about the stress of deadlines, quarterly reports, or corporate politics. But about life. The books that had shaped us. The places we dreamed of visiting. The little, seemingly insignificant things that made us laugh. And with each story, each shared moment, I felt something unravel inside me in the best possible way. By the time the check arrived, I knew. This wasn't just curiosity. This wasn't just the thrill of something new. It was real. As we stepped outside into the cool night air, Daniel hesitated. For the first time all evening, uncertainty flickered across his face. "I know this is new," he said, his voice quieter now. "And I don't want to rush anything. But I also don't want to pretend that this isn't happening." I turned to face him fully, searching his expression. My heart, so unsteady before, now felt strangely calm. "Neither do I," I said. His features softened, his tension easing slightly. And for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. Not just admiration. Hope. Slowly, carefully, he reached for my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. His grip was firm but unhurried, like he was giving me the space to pull away if I wanted to. I didn't. And in that moment, I realized something. Sometimes, the most unexpected moments in life aren't just surprising. They're exactly what we've been waiting for all along.